So there is a so I'll end with there is a false impression, which is very common in the world, that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of religious groups in the world, that each one thinks they're right, and that they all contradict each other because they all say they're right, but they're all different, so therefore they all contradict each other, and therefore it's ridiculous for anyone to think that they have the truth. That's a common way of thinking nowadays, which is very popular among people who have never been contaminated by serious philosophy or the study of actual world religions. It's because if we really look at world religion seriously, and we don't just take this cartoon version of world religions, what we actually find is that in world religions, you tend to find disagreement on a dogmatic level, not on a theological level. I'm going to give you a simple example. Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna. So that is a specific, detailed historical claim that approximately 5,000 years ago, there was a person named Krishna, and there was a person named Arjuna, and they talked to each other. And Krishna said, "I'm God," and Arjuna believed him, and ever since then, a lot of other people also believed it. So that's a specific historical claim. Now, let's say you take Buddha. Buddha appeared thousands of years later and taught something else. Or you take, let's say, Jesus, or you take Muhammad, or you take someone like Moses, the lawgiver. So these people all appeared in different parts of the world. They spoke different languages, and to some extent, they each had their own unique teachings. But if we go deeper, if we go beneath the surface of historical details, what did they actually teach? We find remarkable similarities. And so again, the historical details are different, and fanatics will never agree. If someone says, this is the only way, and someone else, that is the only way, they can never agree. But in fact, it's not the case that in the history of religions, every religion claims it has the only way. If you look at Christianity, they certainly claimed that. Not so much anymore, actually, thank God. I mean, there's still fanatics that kind of haunt the earth. But, and in Islam, even in Hinduism, I mean, there are people who are fanatics. However, if you look at the religions, all world religions only came from two parts of the world, the Middle East and South Asia. Buddhism and Hinduism came from South Asia, and the Abrahamic religions came from the Middle East. So what you find is that in India, which was not a tribal society, it was actually, a very ancient agrarian society with a sophisticated intellectual tradition, they were not religious fanatics. If you look, so first of all, the idea that every religion claims that only we have the truth is historically false. It's historically wrong. What you find in South Asia is, going back thousands and thousands of years, people understood that the same God is present in many places and called by different names. So that's the first thing. It's not true that religions tend to be fanatical. Secondly, there are three basic things that religions have to explain. And that is nature. What is the physical world, the earth? Number two, what is the soul, if there is one? And number three, what is God, if there is one? And so, in Sanskrit, this is called tattva-traya, or the three fundamental principles. So if you just look at how, let's say, theistic traditions describe God, what you find is it's basically the same. Basically what a philosophy professor I once had called a triple O God. God is omniscient, God is omnipotent, God is omnibenevolent. In other words, all good, all knowing, all kind. Now, you find this exact same claim in so many, practically in all the theistic religions. So, Not all. I mean, anyway, I won't go into Gnosticism and Manichaeanism. They're kind of weird things and offshoots. But in terms of the religions that survived and became theistic world religions, they all basically say the same thing. Philosophically, the same thing. They make different claims about when God appeared, or when the Son, or the prophet, or this or that. Yeah, they argue about those things. But in terms of philosophy, they're saying the same thing. Or about the soul, the fact that there's an eternal soul. So, therefore, if we agree that a religion has to explain, or a spiritual tradition, these three things, nature, God, and the soul, then you can actually study this. It's not a question of, which dogma do I choose? They say they're right, they say they're right. We can actually look at this philosophically. To give one example, and then I'll end with this, and then you can ask more questions, or not ask questions so you can eat. There was a great medieval philosopher, theologian, Christian, in the, late Middle Ages, called, Anselmo. Bless you. Gesundheit, yeah. Anselmo. And he gave what is called the ontological proof of the existence of God. This is very famous in the history of Western philosophy. And the argument goes something like this. He said, God is that being, then whom? Sorry for the twisted syntax. God is that being, than whom no greater being can be conceived. I'll put it in more simple English. God is that being that is so great that you can't think of any greater being. If you can think of a greater being, then this guy here is not God. So it has to be, in other words, the greatest possible concept of God is the most true. Now, he was simply trying to prove that God exists. Because, and then he had this trick, it's like a philosophical trick, where he said that if you say God doesn't exist, I can imagine a greater God, one that does exist. Yeah. It's a philosophical trick. It's just a good trick, and atheistic philosophers are still struggling with it. But anyway, but even if you, never mind whether or not he really proved God exists, apart from that, if you accept that the basic idea is true, that if God is infinitely great, here's the logic. If God is infinitely great, then the greatest conception is closest to the truth. Now, interestingly, this is exactly the argument that Rupa Goswami gave in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Rupa Goswami, for those of you who strangely don't know about medieval Indian theologians, there actually are some people that don't know about medieval Indian theologians. Anyway, Rupa Goswami was a very great figure, a devotee of Krishna, and an intellectual giant in his time, from even the point of view of mundane scholars. And so he gave an argument in this work, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, Nectar of Devotion, that Krishna, that at least if you look at the pantheon of Hinduism, pan in Greek means all and theos God, so just like the whole lineup, the whole collection of gods, the pantheon. If you look at the Hindu lineup of gods, he said that Krishna is the original God because he's greater. And he actually went into this, it's very interesting, he went into this analysis of the qualities of different figures like Shiva or Shakti, the goddess, different figures. And he was using an intellectual, he was using a typology which was accepted by intellectuals of his time. He wasn't just making all this up. And he showed that Krishna actually has more qualities. And so it's interesting, he was using, I'm sure without knowing it, a variation of Anselm's argument. So, and the reason I bring this up is because something you can actually do at home. You don't have to pay a Hare Krishna to do this for you. You can actually do it in your own home. As if you look at world religions, not from the point of view of dogmatic claims, fanatical claims, but philosophy, human reason. And you just look at the conception of God and you ask yourself the simple question, which conception is greatest in the sense of, for example, beauty? Let's say someone's very smart but not very beautiful. Well, if someone's very smart and very beautiful, that's even more interesting. And that person will probably get more invitations to parties or something. So I mean, basically the six opulences as given, let's say there's beauty, there's strength, there's wisdom, there is knowledge, detachment. In other words, people can't control you by seducing. You can't be seduced by anything. So you can actually study philosophically and in that sense scientifically. The real problem, imagine if, let's say in the field of medical science, what if medical science was all nationalistic? For example, what if they invented some cure for some disease in Japan, but in America they said, no, we don't want Japanese medicine, we don't want American medicine, or in Israel they only want Israeli medicine. I mean, that's not the nature of science. Israel it's an amazing country, and just in terms of its scientific achievements, which is, it's amazing. Such a small country, everyone knows that. So the point is, if something is discovered in Israel, and many things are discovered in Israel, including really great walking sandals, among other things, not only the Iron Dome, but also walking sandals. So the point is that when something is discovered in Israel, the whole world takes advantage of it. Maybe except the really stupid people, but any rational human being will take advantage of it. It doesn't matter where something comes from. So, same thing with science. Religion has to be put on the level of a science where there's debate and you can test things. It can't be kept on this level of fanaticism and ethnicity. It's like an ethnic characteristic. Because spirituality will only advance in this world if it's put on this rational scientific basis. That's really why the world's going to hell. Because it's like if the only food in the market is bad food, everyone gets sick. And because religion in general is being dealt with in a very unscientific way, there's no advancement. It's not advancing. Spirituality, it's not advancing the way it should because it's being dealt with fanatically or ethnically or racially. Ja. Kan übersetzen.
Do you believe there's only one right choice in religion?
Oh, that's a good one. Good question. Eine gute Frage. Danke. Do I think there's only one right choice in religion? I would say there are many good choices in the sense that if someone, I do believe there's a hierarchy of knowledge. But that's very different than saying there's only one true religion. For example, let's say I'm a scientist. Let's say I do physics. And there are different theories, and let's say there are several good theories. They're put forward by intelligent scientists, they have arguments, but ultimately I believe there is a theory which is the best. Or for example, let's say in another field, maybe to make it more clear, let's say in history. Let's say we're trying to understand why a group of English citizens revolted against their mother country in 1776 in the American colonies. Because almost up until the day of the war, they very much believed they were English citizens, and their main complaint was actually that they were not being given the rights of Englishmen. But anyway, so of course the different scholars put forward theories of what led to the war, or why the Americans won the war against the greatest military power in the world at that time. And so if when you go to the university, you see that scholars disagree, they debate, they have different views. But I think it's fair to say that any qualified scholar will have something important to say. We may ultimately think, well, this is a better interpretation, but there's always some merit. Any serious scholar will come up with some ideas that should be considered, that have some merit to them. Even though I may think, well, I don't think that's the best explanation, but you can learn something there.
Yeah.
And so I think that's my attitude toward the many religions in the world. First of all, I would reject anyone claiming to be religious who is doing evil in the world. Like people that kill innocent people in the name of God, I think are just, they're not contenders. So, 1 second. So among people, let's say among people who claim to be worshiping the divine, however they understand that, and let's say if they have good principles, for example, they believe that on their path they should be charitable, they should help other people, they should not be cruel to any other creature, including non-humans. They should not cause pain and cruelty to other creatures. And so they believe there's some kind of divine power that is itself good and requires goodness in the followers. So I think that idea is true. And so anyone that has some version of that is doing good in the world, or I think they're making progress in their own life. So, there are certain basic ideas. For example, the idea of an eternal soul, which you find, by the way, also in most forms of Buddhism, which the kind of Buddhism that was marketed to Western people is not the Buddhism that became a world religion. So basically, in all the world, and also in a particular, ultimately, I would say it's not really a question of, let's say, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism. Well, I think that's misleading because, for example, take in the Islamic tradition, you have Sufis, who were basically the Muslim bhakti yogis. And so you find a lot of very beautiful expressions of pure devotion. There's one, I forget the name, I studied one great Sufi poet.
Rumi?
And it might have been Rumi, it might have been a lady actually, but the saying was that if I worship God to go to heaven, let me go to hell. In other words, let me just love God purely. In fact, if you look, there are, for example, if you look at medieval Judaism, although Maimonides is like the big hero for many Jews, I think he was not the actual hero. I think there were other groups at the time who had a much better Jewish groups that had a much better spiritual understanding, that talked about a spiritual body of God. And about a spiritual body of God. So I think in all these traditions, so you can find the bhakti yogis in every tradition. And the bhakti yogis in every tradition, those who are really devoted and have a serious spiritual practice to devote themselves fully to God, whether it's in a Christian tradition, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, whatever, those people, I would say, have a lot more in common often than they have in common with other people in their own religion. And so what's interesting about the Bhagavad Gita is that it doesn't give anything like sectarian religion. Krishna is not a jealous God. And so Krishna talks about different spiritual paths like bhakti or gyan, where you just try to cultivate knowledge. And in every religion, you will find people that try to understand the absolute intellectually or through philosophy or theology. So as far as like if you imagine knowledge like a pyramid, and so at the base of the pyramid there are lots of people. So for example, all the people in the world who understand in some way or other that there's a God, So they all agree on that. And then if you keep going up, then all the people that understand that God wants you to love everyone and not kill other people if they don't belong to your religion, that's less people, actually, unfortunately. But it's still, a lot of people. And then the number of people that also understand that we are not just physical bodies, we are actually souls. And it's actually our soul that returns to God. Again, there are a lot of people in hundreds of traditions that understand that. And so basically we're saying is that as you get to the more and more advanced knowledge, that Krishna is giving something which is unique. But that's just the, so to speak, the cherry on the top of the cake. And actually, people that say, oh, there's so many religions and they all say that only they have the truth, which is absolutely not true. Or that they say that and all their claims contradict each other, which is absolutely not true. So people that say, oh, all the religions say the same thing, the only people that say that are people that have never really studied world religions. But if you look at the basic claims, for example, in Islam, they claim that God sent a prophet, Muhammad, the prophet. And Muhammad heard directly from God, well, through the angel Gabriel, and then took dictation to write the Quran. But the claim is that God sent a prophet. Or in Christianity, especially early Christianity that was actually based on what Jesus said, not based on pagan speculation centuries later, Jesus is the Son of God. And so there's the claim that God sent us his Son to the world. Or in Judaism, you have prophets, you have Moses, you have God communicating with various people. The claim that God himself actually came to this world and lived a full life in this world, that claim is only made by one tradition. So it's not that someone else is saying, no, God came to this world and he spoke this book. No, God came to the world. No, there's only one tradition that actually says that. And so in promoting this idea, we're not actually contradicting any other religion. We're not competing with any other religion. And so that's how I see it.